On Friday, a hat-trick of interviews from Miles Jacobson hit the internet. First The Athletic, then Eurogamer, and finally BBC. They all centred around one subject: the cancellation of FM25. So let's talk about it.
The reason for the cancellation was really simple, which is I wasn't happy with the quality of the game.
So there we have it. I mean, I wouldn't expect Miles to say anything different. What else could he have even said? He loved the game so much that he didn't want to share it. The game was awesome, but somewhere along the line they realised they made something entirely different. No, we know the game was cancelled because it wasn't ready, and this is merely a confirmation of such. But from the interviews we can piece together a little bit of information. It wasn't fun, Miles explained to Eurogamer. It felt clunky. He goes on to say there was too much stuff to do in between games, describing it as slow and painful. Now this to me is intriguing. It's a criticism that's been levelled at recent iterations of FM, too many emails, repetitive tasks and so on. We'll be keen to see whether this has been improved in FM26. Was this a case of reflection of the overall game flow, or an indicator that FM25 had exacerbated this further?
We'd made too many changes to the UI. We tried to be too clever.
Talking to The Athletic, Miles said, "I literally sat there and just couldn't find things in my own game. It was pretty embarrassing." To Eurogamer, if you can't find something in game, you made a mistake. You can't argue with that. It was hinted in the initial cancellation that they had difficulties with the UI UX, and there seems to be further confirmation. There are few games as reliant on its interface as FM. They need to get this right. That said, I was a huge advocate for the mocks they showed. Whilst lacking polish, the tile and card system had potential. Now, progressive disclosure is very effective and proven to reduce the time spent looking for information even when there might be more clicks. It is, however, reliant on the right information being surfaced initially. So for that reason, I hope they haven't abandoned the approach entirely, merely refined it. It's something I look forward to seeing more news about.
And we've gone back to something a little bit more familiar. It's still new, there's still a lot of difference, but it's a lot more familiar.
In June last year, Miles spoke about removing the inbox in favour of a WhatsApp-esque messaging system. This hasn't worked, and so the inbox will be returning. Honestly, I don't feel good about this. As mentioned earlier, the bloat surrounding the inbox has been a criticism of recent versions, and so this gives me cause for pause. Of course, a working system is better than a broken one, and recognising that something isn't working and being willing to climb down from that is an admirable step. But I hope the driving factors behind a move away from the inbox are still addressed.
And there were 3 things that went wrong on the same day.
Onto the delay, and Miles speaks about 3 issues arising on the day of FM25's trailer release: a development oversight, a legal issue, and a mysterious third-party thing. It's all a bit vague, and I appreciate that it kind of has to be. It is refreshing, however. The legal issues and mysterious third-party thing are probably justification enough for the cancellation that mentioning their own shortcomings is unnecessary. There's a degree of transparency in revealing one's mistakes, but the lack of specifics creates an impression of opaqueness. There is also a lot of talk about stock market responsibilities, both in terms of the delay and subsequent cancellation. And this points to difficulties in being truly transparent. None of this, however, is new information. It was alluded to in the cancellation statement. The fact of the matter is, there are layers of bureaucracy that stand between Sports Interactive and us. I don't expect anything to change in that regard in the near future. Messaging will be curated, just like these interviews have been. Now, I know a lot of people will point to other companies doing dev diaries as an approach that provides more transparency, which is a fair point. I would love to have more insight, especially around the challenges and how ideas have iterated over time. But I also put my thoughts down into writing. I'm expressing disappointment or concern about things that have changed since earlier in the development process. I'm feeding a sentiment of negativity. I'm basing that not on first-hand experience of actually using those features, but on my perception of what those features would be. Now that's part of the reason why I take my time to react. I want to codify my thoughts. I want to make sure I've taken in as much information as I can. But the truth is, none of it matters. It's all going to be somewhat abstract until we can get our hands on the finished product and evaluate it holistically. That doesn't stop us wanting more information. That doesn't stop what information we do get from being interesting. It doesn't stop us from having opinions.
We know we looked a bit stupid, it was a little bit embarrassing, but it was also unavoidable because of these unknown unknowns that hit us.
As far as moments in this interview go, it's a relatively throwaway statement, but something I do want to latch onto. Every project has unknown unknowns, unforeseen circumstances that couldn't have reasonably been anticipated, and the scale of them usually dictates how long a project ends up delayed. In an interview with The Athletic though, Miles explains one of the known unknowns, something that can be anticipated but not accurately quantified. He talks about migrating to a new coding language, expecting it to take about 2 weeks to do all the work of converting the C++ code into C#. Some of it took 2 weeks, some of it took 9 months. That sounds bad. The difference between a hamster pregnancy and a human pregnancy. According to Wikipedia, I have not been impregnating hamsters. Now it sounds bad, but it feels like it's missing context. We don't know the scope, how much was being converted, how much was being written from scratch. We don't know what some means, 50% taking 2 weeks, 49% taking an extra week on top of that, and 1% throwing things completely out of whack is kind of reasonable and expected. 50% of it taking 9 months, however, that's a problem. And it kind of loops back to what I was saying earlier. Without that further context, it's all just perception. The same piece of information can be interpreted as a major fuck-up or just par for the course. So, Miles, let me interview you. Just to be clear, that obviously won't happen. I'm not so delusional as to think there's any viability in that request.
So we have gone quite big on women's football. We'll be making announcements in the next few weeks on exactly how big.
First real snippet of any news on the upcoming game, although it's not necessarily new information. To The Athletic, it was confirmed that countries' leagues will be in the low double figures, so I'm guessing between 10 and 30 or so, and that 35,000 players have been added to the database. Whilst those are numbers I expect will be expanded over the years, it does seem a pretty decent size for year one. Miles also mentions EAFC, who have carved SI out to allow them licenses for the women's game. I think this is interesting. Football Manager and EAFC are different genres within the football niche, and it's encouraging to see them work together. I mean, money talks, let's be real, but it's good to see that previously exclusive licensing deals don't necessarily have to be exclusive. Maybe there's some space for movement on these issues in the future. Looking at you, Kashavit, Brianza, Parthenope. Otherwise, news on FM26 is very light. Miles tells Eurogamer, I don't believe we're going to be disappointing people when we bring the game out. We've got a fucking great game. At this point, it's just words. As mentioned earlier, none of it really matters until we can get our hands on the game. Now there is more discussed across the interviews, though these are the things that I thought were interesting or pertinent. I will pop a link to all the interviews in the description below. These interviews serve to draw a line under the debacle that was FM25, and whilst it's nice to get a little peek behind the curtain, it is still a little light on detail. That's to be expected. Specifics will remain internal, but hopefully we can now move forwards to thinking about FM26. Now that is 2 to 3 months away. Feels like forever. I really do hope these interviews means that coming soon, mentioned in the teaser, is just around the corner. Before I go, there is just one more thing to address.
I'm used to death threats, which is a ridiculous thing to say, but I've had quite a few of them now. What I'm not used to is anti-Semitic abuse.
This is not really pertinent to the game, but it can't nor shouldn't be ignored. This is not acceptable. Now, FM community is not a monolith, The actions of a few doesn't mean that everyone should be tarred with the same brush, but we can do better, and it starts with me. The words I say, the sentiments I foster, that contributes to the overall feeling. So if I ever say anything that makes you feel like you need to harass someone, I need to be challenged. I should be the one being harassed. By the same token, if you think it's acceptable to abuse people online, you are not welcome here.